Hello everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story. The Larrabee place hunched into the New Mexico dust like it wanted to disappear. From the highway it looked like a low scar, adobe the color of dried blood, windows set narrow as watchful eyes. I took the caretaking job because Mara's cousin needed someone cheap and quiet to keep an eye on it while she and her partner drove east. 3 months. Keys under the horseshoe. Fridge stocked, truck in the carport, stipend wired every Friday. After a year of apartment walls thin as paper and sirens that wrote themselves into my sleep, the promise of empty miles and quiet nights felt like an apology the world was finally willing to make. It did not, as it turned out, apologize. It held its breath. The living room was the heart of the house. A cathedral of bone-white plaster whose ceiling peeked into a ribcage of timber reclaimed from some long-dead barn. The beams were dark, hand-hewn, thick enough to take a man's weight and then some. Whoever built this room had loved the bones of things. Rustic, Mara's cousin had said on the phone, and I'd laughed and said that word so often meant unfinished. But when I stood under those beams at the end of my first day, the word that came instead was hollow. Sound climbed and didn't come down. The air stayed cool even when the sun made the yard shimmer. My steps arrived late to my ears, like someone else was following me. The first week behaved. Morning coffee on the east porch while the sun burned the horizon clean. Afternoons spent in the wide leather chair with a book and a glass sweating on a coaster cut from a mesquite stump. Evenings looping the fence line while owls traded news in the cottonwoods by the wash. I learned the house's small noises, the evaporative cooler's wet sigh, the cupboard latches pop, the skitter of lizards sprinting across the stucco. Silence was plentiful, yes, but it had seams you could trace. It wasn't an emptiness. It was a surface. On the 8th night the surface rippled. A noise woke me that wasn't panic loud or movie loud, but intentional, the way a cough can be more message than symptom. From somewhere above the living room came a scrape. Not the nervous flutter of mice. Not wood giving up a day's heat. A deliberate drag, like a coarse rope being pulled slow over a rough edge. Pull, pause, pull. I lay in the guest room with the sheet pushed down, counting the spaces between drags the way you count seconds between lightning and thunder. 10 minutes of that patience. Then it stopped, and the house inhaled again. I slept because bodies insist, but I woke with the sound lodged under my sternum like a splinter I couldn't tongue free. Daylight wrote explanations. Wind. Expansion. Birds where birds shouldn't be. I climbed to the roof with the house ladder, found no loose flashing, no disturbed vents. Inside, I tilted my head back until my neck ached, scanning the beams. No fresh scratches, no dust trails, nothing to capture that slow insistence from the night. When the sun slid away, the scraping came back, as if my denial had been an invitation. By the 4th night I stood beneath the central beam with my phone light aimed up. "Go on," I said to the empty timber, hating that the words exited me. The rope noise kept moving above the plaster like something testing its own gravity. The cone of light revealed only smooth grain, the cobwebbed corners trembling at my breath. The sound ceased the moment I lowered the phone, as though it needed me looking away to exist. The next morning I opened the narrow hatch in the hall closet that led to the crawl space above the living room. "Don't bother," Mara's cousin had said. "It's 3 feet high and full of holiday junk." But I bothered anyway. Dust lifted in clouds that tasted like old books and disuse. Fiberglass needled my wrists as I belly crawled, flashlight shoved ahead, its beam cutting the dark into a white tunnel. The roof timbers, cross-bracing, ducting, a wooden city. The smell up there was wrong for the desert, sweet and unclean, like lilies forgotten in a vase until the water turns to tea. Where the main beam crossed the hollow above the living room, my light found something that didn't belong. A coil of rope draped over the timber, thick as my thumb, its twist old-fashioned, the fibers darkened not with oil but with time. Not the cheerful yellow nylon you buy with a bag of bungee cords. Hemp, maybe? One end was chewed into strands the color of tobacco spit. The other, a loop made with more care than I wanted to imagine. I touched it, and the sweet smell surged, as if I'd woken it. The rope felt heavy in a way that ignored physics. It had soaked up something and kept it. I backed out with the coil bunched against my chest like an ugly infant. In the living room I set it on the coffee table and sat on the floor with my back to the leather chair, staring. The hatch door had left a smear of dust down my shirt fronts. I wiped my face and found grit in the lines. I told myself someone left it decades ago. I told myself it explained the sound. I told myself a small pile of facts could barricade a large unease. That evening, reading in the chair, I noticed the remote, placed carefully on the arm, slid off by itself, a smooth little suicide that happened only when I sat beneath the main beam. I put it back. 30 seconds, maybe 45, then a quiet, purposeful glide to the rug. Experiment repeated, result repeated. The house held its breath. I learned to hold mine. By morning I had a plan in the tidy way a plan can exist only before you test it. I'd moved the chair. People rearranged furniture all the time without arguing the psychology of it. I slid the leather beast 3 feet to the left, away from the imaginary line I'd drawn under the beam. I set the remote on the same arm, sat, and pretended to read. A fly worried at the window. Heat climbed the walls like a tide. When the glide came, it was slower, as if whatever invisible gradient tugged the remote had to extend itself to reach. It still reached. The plastic edge kissed the leather, tipped, fell. I don't know when annoyance became anger. Somewhere between the 4th and the 6th drop I found myself speaking to the room the way you talk to a stubborn drawer. "Stop it," I said, and the remorseless thing was that a part of me believed something could listen. I lifted the remote and threw it onto the couch. It struck, bounced, and stilled, saved only by not being where it wanted to go. That felt like victory, briefly. I should have packed the truck and gone. That sentence looks neat here, but it would have felt like admitting I believed there was a reason to leave besides boredom and heat. Pride is an ecosystem. It does not collapse easily. I called Mara that afternoon on the only step where the cellular bars behaved. "You sound weird," she said. "There's a rope." That was my opening. In the crawl space. Old. Heavy. It smells like. I fished for words that would make sense in her kitchen, in the air of a city apartment where water ran in walls and neighbors coughed on the other side of drywall. Like flowers that went bad. Gross. Her fork clinked against a bowl. "Throw it away." I tried. I hadn't, but the idea slid over me like cold water. "I mean I will." "And the noise?" "Probably the rope shifting when the house cools." It felt good to say a sentence with its nouns and verbs aligned to sanity. "I'm being dramatic." "You're always dramatic." I could hear her smile. "It's why we like you. Send me a picture of the rope. I want to see your cursed antique." I didn't. The thought of capturing it, and asking my phone to carry it made my throat tight. Instead I dragged a contractor bag from under the sink and, after staring at the rope for a while like it might grow a mouth, worked the coil inside. The plastic crackled. The smell dulled but did not vanish. I tied a knot and carried the bag to the truck and left it in the bed. Sun hammered the metal. Somewhere in the scrub a cricket found a note and repeated it until repetition became the point. That night the scraping didn't return. I lay on top of the sheet, sweat mapping my spine, and counted silence like money. Twice I dozed. Twice I woke to nothing but the desert's stubborn quiet. The house felt relieved in a way that made me suspect I was learning its moods. At 4 in the morning the truck alarm erupted. I ran barefoot, keys a set of teeth in my fist. The truck's red eyes pulsed. The bed was empty. The contractor bag lay in the drive, 10 feet behind the bumper, its knot neatly untied, its mouth yawning open like a laugh. The rope sat in the shadow of the wheel well as though it had rolled out to catch dew. I stood there until the alarm reprised its complaint, and I silenced it, each beep a blade between ribs. I bent, and the sweet smell hit so hard I swallowed against the urge to gag. "Okay," I said to nobody and to the high stars and to the dark. "Okay." I put the rope back in the bag, retied the knot hard enough to pinch my palms, and drove. There are dumping places in the desert you learn the way city people learn coffee shops. Wide arroyos where people retire mattresses and pallets, and the skeletons of couches. I parked at one of those anonymous edges and slung the bag into a nest of sun-cracked tires slick as whale skin. The bag caught, tore, and the rope tumbled luxuriously into the pile like it had been waiting to join others that had done quiet work. Driving away felt like cheating on a test whose answers I'd been allowed to study. Back at the house, the living room smelled faintly of the rope anyway. I turned on the box fan and gave the air a job. The remote stayed where I left it, because there was no reason for it to move now, and because the beam learned something about me and let me have the small dignity of pretend. I laughed, lightheaded with morning and relief and the sense of victory you get by escaping a small, invented trap. At noon, stepping out to fetch the mail from the tin box on the post, I saw the contractor bag retied and set neatly against the front door. The knot faced me. The mouth was puckered like a mouth that had kissed a mirror. I stood there and watched a dust devil chase itself stupid along the fence. A raven landed on the post, cocked its head, and made the creaking door noise ravens make when they're thinking. The heat sang. A vein ticked in my temple like a moth. "I get it," I said. "You can win." I dragged the bag inside because defying it suddenly felt childish. I didn't untie it. I left it by the chair and did not sit down. That night, in the guest room, the rope scrape began again, patient as a tailor. It is hard to describe how quickly days can braid when each contains the same knot. Morning, coffee, a wary circuit of the living room, the bag unmoved. Afternoon, reading that reads you back, paragraphs shaking loose like screws because your attention is elsewhere. Evening, a pocket of walkable gold light, coyotes combing the wash with their voices. Night, the measured drag above the beam, the rope on its invisible errands, the bag breathing as plastic does when it warms and cools. I tried pettier forms of resistance. Salt across the threshold. A strip of blue painter's tape over the knot, a tiny seal I could check. A note scrawled on a post-it and stuck to the plastic. Stay. An instruction like you give a dog you want to believe will obey. The tape wrinkled in the night. The note migrated to the underside without falling. Once, the bag had shifted 2 inches and left a crescent of clean floor under its previous sullen footprint, like the outline chalk cops draw around the recently dead. I dreamt about the loop. Not the coil, not the bulk. Just the loop at one end, a perfect question. In the dream it was large enough to walk through if you angled your shoulders. I stepped toward it because the dream had only that one option. On the other side, my breath fogged glass. My reflection delayed a fraction, like a live stream over bad internet. When I raised a hand, it lifted late. When I turned my head, the me there kept looking forward a moment longer, and then, catching up, overcorrected. The feeling was like dancing with a partner who wants to lead and cannot stand that you can too. I woke one morning with a mark around my right wrist. A paler band in the shower, more visible when wet. The skin didn't hurt. It itched the special itch you find under a wedding ring when you've worn it through summer. The tape on the knot was broken. The bag sat content where it had been. I cut the tape away with a pocket knife and threw the roll into a drawer and went outside and leaned my forehead against the shadowed stucco beside the porch until the grit imprinted my skin. What is the difference between superstition and an experiment? Controls, maybe? Documentation. I started a notebook. Date, time, rope noise yes/no. Knot status. Any other oddities. The first week of notes looked like the paranoid log of a lighthouse keeper. The second week, less so. A pattern flinched into view. The scraping sound always began within 20 minutes of midnight. It always lasted 10 to 12 minutes, apart from the one night I fell asleep early and woke from the dream of the loop to find the house in the middle of static, the scrape unbroken, as though I had missed its starting gun, and it had rewarded me by continuing longer. The knot tape broke only at night. The bag did not turn up outside again. perhaps because I had learned the shape of surrender it preferred. Mara texted, "You alive?" I sent a sunset and a line about coyotes like prayer shawls draped over the hills. She sent back a voice memo of street noise and laughter and the clatter of a barista chasing a portafilter back onto a machine. I held the phone under the beam and played the city up into the dark space, like turning a radio toward a storm to show it where the loudness comes from. The scraping stopped for 3 seconds, and I don't know why I felt that as attention. I moved the leather chair back to where it belonged. The remote obeyed gravity. I sat and put my book in my lap and read the same sentence several times. That which returns does not always want to be found, but it will leave a path if only to prove it can. The author had not meant rope. I underlined it anyway. On the 18th night I told myself I would open the bag while the sound was happening. I wanted to misalign the scene and the herd, to allow one to witness the other. I waited until the first slow drag announced itself overhead, and then I crouched, pinched the knot, and pulled. The plastic breathed out in a sweet, damp sigh. I folded the mouth back and aimed my flashlight inside. The bag was empty. The rope lay across the coffee table, arranged in a figure 8, the kind sailors make when they are both bored and precise. I had not seen it move. I had not heard it move. It simply was where it wanted to be. The scrape above me continued, unembarrassed by having no visible agent, as if the act of dragging had carved a groove in the dark itself and now moved along that path, a ritual paced by memory alone. I reached to touch the loop. The instant I did, the scraping stopped. The house exhaled. The coil twitched under my fingers like a living thing caught napping. I withdrew my hand. The smell leaned toward rot. Nobody called. The notebook filled. My wristband faded and then darkened again and then, one morning, existed on the other arm. The first time I tried to throw the rope away had been symbolic. The second time I decided to be mean. Dawn with its birdless sky and its light that made everything honest. I put on work gloves and carried the rope, naked now, no bag, to the truck as though it could be embarrassed. The weight of it was inconsistent. At the doorway it felt heavy, as if the house were reluctant to let go. In the yard it was lighter, limp in my hands, a shawl you carry to a friend who is always cold. In the truck bed it seemed to settle into itself, gaining pounds. I tried not to assign meaning to this. You can live your life like that if you're careful and lonely enough. I drove to the county landfill that smelled like a wound. I paid a man in a booth who did not look at me and did not look at what I'd brought. I backed into a space between chilled mountains of mattresses and last year's televisions. I threw the rope hard at a cliff of broken drawers and contractor bags that had once been other people's lives. It hit, fell, slid into a crevasse of plastic, vanished. I waited until the roar of the bulldozer flattened my hope into something more manageable. I went to the self-serve car wash and hosed the truck bed until water ran clean. I hosed my arms and the insides of my wrists until goose flesh rose. I drove home with the windows open and the wind turned up to loud, the kind of loud that makes your ears ring after you shut the engine off. The living room smelled like it always did. The bag sat folded behind the armchair, its utility proven, its future ordained. I took a shower and watched dust strike the drain. I ate an apple. I napped because I had, for a while, run out of reasons not to. At sunset, when the light through the south window finds the beam's underside and paints a perfect copper bar across it, the rope was back. Not on the table. Not in the chair. It hung from the central timber, looped down. A knot had been tied over the beam I could not reach without a ladder, the kind of knot you can only make with both hands and all your attention. The loop hung at eye level, still as a photograph. I stood under it, and did not stand under it. I felt the difference in my body like the difference between yes and no when you mean them. I walked around the loop in a circle like a teacher around a student's science project, looking for glue showing through the seam. I moved a chair but did not stand on it. The loop kept the same respectful distance. The sweet smell was present, but tempered, as though the rope preferred this new posture and would behave while it wore it. My phone chimed and I jumped hard enough to knock my shoulder against plaster. A calendar reminder, pay a bill, the polite admin of a life that believed in months. I dismissed it. When I looked back at the loop, the air seemed to tremble inside the circle, the way heat makes mirage waves over asphalt. If I blinked, the trembling stopped. If I stared, it resumed. I had cried that way once, a small boy not wanting to be seen crying, holding tears in my eyes until they made the world swim. I pulled the contractor bag over the loop to the fullest extent a man can put a plastic bag on a metaphor. The rope tolerated being covered but refused to look stifled. The bag bulged and contoured. I taped the mouth closed with angry stripes. When I stepped back, it looked obscene, like a terrible party favor. The scrape did not come that night. It did not come the next. The house breathed a steady rhythm. The bagged loop hung decorously from the beam like a lantern wrapped for the season. If you had entered then you might have said the house was a little strange, sure. But houses are as weird as the people who own them, and what business is it of mine? You might have laughed. You might have sat where I had not sat for 2 nights and flipped channels in the dying light. On the 3rd night, something scraped, just once, not above me but inside the bag. A single lazy drag, like a cat stretching. It woke me. I lay there with my mouth open before the yawn arrived. I went into the living room and found the tape unbroken. I touched the bag and felt a hum, not mechanical, not electrical, as if the thing inside was leaning into the plastic to see if I would lean back. I leaned back. Being alone too long makes you weird, but it doesn't always make you quiet. On day 20 I drove into town and went into Booths and Beans, which is a feed store with a lunch counter grafted onto one end, as if the architect had been dared to solve 2 hungers at once. A woman with hair like thunderstorms poured me coffee and asked what I was after. I told her, sunflower seed bread information. Which kind? She asked over the violent music of the grinder. About the Larrabee place, I said, and watched her eyes do the small adjust that says a person has thrown a pebble into a memory with still water. Not mine to tell, she said, which is country for keep asking. I'm just caretaking, I said. They're back in August. I was curious. The beams are old. Must have been a story. There's always a story. She put a cup down with the tenderness of a funeral director placing hands. The one people like to repeat is tidy and mean. The other one is less tidy. Start with the tidy. Man built it for a woman who wanted a church she could live in. He left. She stayed. She had a mind that didn't rest and a throat that did. That's the polished version. The one people tell at the end of a barbecue when the kids are asleep and the ice is soft. And the other one? The other one says a boy hung himself in there, in the 80s, which already tells you it's probably wrong because the 80s don't feel like rope to people. He'd been dared or broken-hearted or just the kind who found the one door no one else sees. Depends who's talking. The details shift. The loop is always right there. She tapped the air at my level. That part never moves. You believe it? I believe something heavy happened in that room and the house learned to carry it. Some places do. You can call that superstition, and I'll call it paying attention to weather. The owners? Bought it cheap, she said gently. Sometimes you get a deal because someone else already paid. I drank coffee that tasted like the color of the table. I bought seed I didn't need and bread that was a rumor of sour. On the way out, the woman called. If you hear a thing that sounds like rope, go sit with somebody whose head is not yours for a while. I will, I lied because I had learned the loop's grammar, and it liked my attention. On the drive back, the radio cut in and out as if the miles were a tuner I had to find again with my fingers. A preacher told me some burdens are chosen and others assigned, and that both can be set down, and I snapped the dial off because he hadn't sounded like a man who'd been assigned much. At the house, the bag was still taped. The loop hung with patience that felt like muscles held in a pose. I stood under it and told it the tidy story and the untidy one. I said the names I had been given as if each were a coin I could push into a slot that might make something blink. For the first time the smell changed toward salt, like a man who has cried into a cotton shirt. That night the scrape above the beam resumed not as a measured draw but as a kind of rehearsal, faster, fumbled, impatient. My notebook entries for the next 3 nights are loops of words, the handwriting a washout, back, forth, back. I did not sleep in the guest room. I sat in the leather chair until dawn and learned how long a loop can hold a man without touching him. By the 30th night, the scrape had become more than a sound. It pressed into me, threaded itself through bone until I swore my ribs hummed with the rhythm. Silence between scrapes wasn't relief. It was anticipation, a stretched wire waiting for the next pull. I stopped counting. I stopped writing. The notebook sat open on the table. Pen bled into a sunburst stain where I'd fallen asleep mid-sentence. I thought, briefly, about calling Mara again. But what was I supposed to say? It's happening every night now, like the house is teaching me a song I'm not supposed to forget. She would have laughed kindly, maybe with concern tucked behind it, but she'd still call it one of my episodes. Words were poor currency for what lived in the rafters. So instead I bargained. The first bargain was simple. I wouldn't open the bag again if the noise would stop. The tape stayed sealed. The scrapes slowed but did not cease. The second bargain, I'd stay in the chair until dawn, eyes fixed on the loop, if it would promise not to move closer. That night, the loop swayed gently as though in agreement. The air under it smelled faintly metallic, like a coin rubbed raw between fingers. I woke once with my head tilted back, my throat exposed, and the loop directly above me. It hadn't moved, I had. The leather chair seemed to recline more than usual, deeper, tilting me into a posture of offering. I bolted upright, skin clammy, and the loop hung still, patient as always. By day, I became clumsy. Coffee mugs slipped from my hands. I tripped on thresholds I had stepped over 100 times. My reflection in the hallway mirror began to look delayed, a heartbeat behind my movements. The first time I noticed, I laughed. By the third, I covered the mirror with a towel and stopped walking that hallway at night. The neighbors, if you could call them that, scattered ranchers a mile down the road, began waving when I drove past for groceries. I realized, after the third wave, that I wasn't waving back. I wasn't even lifting a hand. I'd forgotten how to make that simple courtesy happen. My body felt trained by something else now, tuned to different gestures. On the 35th night, the rope didn't scrape. Instead, a new sound, a low creak, like weight settling onto wood. A pause. Then a long exhale that wasn't mine, wasn't the desert wind, wasn't anything I could explain without breaking my own rules. I held my breath until stars burst behind my eyes. And for the first time, I whispered into the cavernous room. "What do you want?" The loop swayed once, gentle as a nod. The morning after, a new mark circled my ankle. A faint line, pale against sunburn, too perfect to be an accident. I touched it, and the itch traveled upward, like a thread being pulled through skin. When I walked, I limped, though I couldn't say why. The loop was gone from the beam. The bag sat on the floor by the chair, neatly folded, empty. The smell had faded, replaced with a faint char, like rope singed just enough to remember fire. I thought about leaving again, throwing clothes into the truck, heading east until the desert gave way to green. But when I tried to picture it, the thought bent back, like a branch refusing to snap. My ankle throbbed when I entertained the idea of escape. Instead, I cleaned. It felt like the only defense left: polish the table, sweep the dust, mop the kitchen tile. The rope was not gone, it was simply polite enough to let me pretend. By sundown, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and sweat. I almost convinced myself I'd taken back control. That night, the scrape didn't come. Neither did the creak. The silence felt different, heavier, as though waiting for me to notice. When I finally drifted to sleep, the dream arrived sharp as broken glass. I stood under the beam. The loop hung, enormous, glowing faintly like a halo tarnished with smoke. I stepped toward it. My ankle ached as though tethered, but I didn't resist. I raised my hands, slipped them through, and the loop tightened, not choking, but embracing. The world tilted. My reflection was there again, late and smiling, arms at its sides while mine reached upward. I woke with my arms stretched above me, fingers cramped from clenching invisible fibers. My ankle burned. The mark was darker now, raised like a welt. On the coffee table sat the rope, coiled neatly, the loop on top as though waiting. It no longer smelled of flowers or salt or fire. It smelled of me. On the 37th day, someone knocked. Not the crisp rap of a neighbor, nor the apologetic flutter of a delivery driver. 3 knuckles, evenly spaced, like a metronome testing a new room. Noon heat had driven the cicadas into their thin, metallic choir. The knock sliced through and waited. I opened the door with my shoulder braced, as if a wind might be crouched there. A man stood on the stoop wearing a hat the color of bones boiled clean. His truck idled at the end of the drive with the modest restlessness of old engines. He held a clipboard the way a priest holds a book, both shield and script. "You the caretaker?" he asked, voice low enough that the heat didn't evaporate it. "For now." He angled his head, gaze clicking past me into the living room like a measuring tape let loose. "Name's Harrow." He said it as though it explained the hat, the truck, the clipboard, the way he took up space without apology. "County assessor. Been meaning to make sure the parcel notes are right. You need to come in?" He did not. He took off his hat as if to refuse the house the disrespect of wearing it, and still stayed on the threshold. "Some houses you step into," he said without looking at me. "Some you don't unless asked." He flipped a page. "How long have the beams had their crossed tie?" I followed his gaze up, to where the central timber met the shorter brace that ran east-west. "Since I arrived," I said. "Older than that, I think." He made a mark with a dull pencil. "Ever get a smell up there? Like flowers left too long?" I felt my throat choose silence before my mouth could. He didn't seem to require an answer. He put his hat back on like armor and pointed with the pencil toward the wash. "When the storms come, the water will try to come through here. It remembers the route. You give it a path, it'll take it. You block it, it'll make one. That's just water. Other things are less polite." "Other things?" I said, and hated how much hope I smuggled into the words. He peered at my ankle, at the pale ring just visible above my sock. His mouth tightened. "Don't sleep under the beam," he said gently, as if telling a child not to swallow a marble. "Not till you know which of you owes who." He left without taking a single step inside. The truck shrank down the road, carrying its own weather. I shut the door and found the rope on the table again. Loop turned toward the entry like an ear. "You have fans," I told it, but my voice tried to make it a joke and failed. The loop did not dignify the line. That evening I dragged the leather chair all the way to the far wall, beyond the imagined gravity of the beam. I laid a sleeping bag on the kitchen tile, beneath the fluorescent hum and the slow, blessed boredom of the refrigerator. I closed my eyes to the romance of self-endangerment. At midnight exactly, the scrape began. Not above the beam. Along the tile, faint as a moth. I opened my eyes to find the rope had uncoiled itself from the table, crossing the living room in a lazy S, loop leading, like a scout. It paused at the threshold of the kitchen the way Harrow had paused at mine. The loop lifted, only an inch, but enough to show intention, and tilted, as though considering the floor I had chosen like a stubborn animal assessing a new stall. "Not here," I whispered, and for the first time I felt the ridiculousness of speaking to it falter. The loop settled. It drew itself back across the tile with that same unhurried drag, retreat without shame. The scrape continued in the living room, as if a rehearsal needed no audience. In the morning, a white scuff traced the rope's path like chalk lines left from a crime scene diagram no one had cleared. I got on my knees with a rag and comet powder and scrubbed. The mark lightened. It did not leave. The notebook became a ledger. I did not mean for it to. It happened in the way moss happens on the side of a rock that sees more shade than sun. Columns suggested themselves: date, hour, sound, distance of loop from beam, estimated, smell, flowers, salt, metal, smoke, me, new marks, wrist, ankle, throat, leave blank, leave blank, leave blank. I was embarrassed by the neatness of my handwriting. It looked like a person in control. I tried variables. Moved the chair. Slept in the truck. Left the radio on under the beam tuned to static, then to a mariachi station out of Las Cruces, then to a talk show where men argued about pest control with the intensity of theologians. The scrape paid none of it any mind. When I left the house, I'd come back to find the rope where it preferred, sometimes coiled, sometimes looped and ready, sometimes invisibly present only in the way the air seemed to vibrate under the timber, like the barely audible whine of electricity in a CRT screen left on. One afternoon the loop hung again, unbagged, precisely at eye level. Beneath it, directly beneath it, a single nail protruded from the floorboard I had not noticed before. Not tall enough to stub a toe. Tall enough to catch a sock. The nail was new. Clean, bright, not yet surrendered to desert tarnish. Cute, I said, anger crisp as a cracker snapping. I pried it out with the claw end of a hammer and carried it to the trash as though carrying a dead spider out of a bath. When I came back with a wood filler stick and sandpaper, the nail stood again, identical, in the same place, the floorboard unscarred. I removed it again, this time taking the whole board up, easing it out like a loose tooth. Under the board, the joists looked the way a mouth looks under a missing molar, absence insisting on attention. In that absence something lay. Not the nail. A small brass disc, about the size of a quarter, stamped with a number 0. I lifted it, and the smell of the rope rose like heat off the road. On the underside of the disc, faintly scratched by an impatient hand, was another number, 1. The ledger got a new column. Discs collected in a jar beside the notebook, 0 to 1 on the first, 2/3 on the second, 4/5, 6/7, like a counting song someone had started long ago and left for me to finish. Each time I pried up a board where the nail insisted, a disc waited, and each disc answered itself. One number struck bold, the other ghosted beneath, a shadow you only see after your eyes adjust. I called Boots and Beans. The woman with the thunderhead hair answered. You ever seen brass survey markers inside a house? I asked, trying to bleed the panic from the question. In a house? She said. They don't survey rooms. They survey land. Unless you mean memorial plaques. Does it say anyone's name? Just numbers. Pairs. She was quiet long enough I thought the line had died. If you've started taking them, she said finally, you'd best put them back. Numbers isn't how a house keeps score. But a house will try. How do I put them back? I asked, a voice inside me already rehearsing the answer and finding it wanting. You'll figure it, she said kindly, and hung up like someone who has reached the last sentence she is allowed to say. That night the scrape went on until I understood it wasn't a request. It was the sound of a pen drawing a line under a sum. On the 40th night I set up the ladder. I had told myself I would not. I had told myself I respected the boundary implied by height, by the furniture of air some rooms arrange. But the loop hung with a patience that was starting to look like contempt, and the discs glinted in the jar like coins some river had decided to spit up because it preferred honesty to greed. I opened the ladder. I climbed until my head pulled level with the beam and the loop. The rope did not move. It did not need to. Up close, the fibers looked less like rope and more like hair braided until the braid becomes its own animal. The loop's inside edge was burnished darker, as though hands had slid along it for years. The knot over the beam was simple and perfect, the kind you could undo with a single insult. I reached, and my hands started trembling before my mind agreed. Easy, I said to my hands, which was like telling a tide to please consider the shore. I slid fingers into the loop, not closing them, not yet. The smell of myself rose, and then beneath it, older notes. Lilies gone old, a struck match, salt, and a clean coldness like coins lifted from a fountain in winter. Show me, I said. The loop lifted an inch to meet me. The change in weight was immediate and obscene. The rope became a live thing, not resisting but asserting, and the ladder stuttered against the floor as though remembering gravity too quickly. I gripped the beam with my left hand and the loop with my right, pivoted my weight back so that I wasn't a pendulum waiting for encouragement. My chest brushed the wood. My cheek pressed the underside of the beam, cool and smooth as bone. Inside the loop, the air thickened. The kitchen light, the doorway, the couch, all of it wavered the way scenery wavers in cheap cinema when a character is about to walk into a different time. I could see the nailhead in the floor below, bright as a star mapped onto a domestic sky. I could see the jar, the brass discs winking their math. I could see myself in the dark glass of the south window, reflection half a beat late, eyes finding me with the relief of a dog finding its person at last. "Show me," I said again, and this time it felt like permission. The loop tightened. Not like a trap. Like a handshake become an embrace, become the understanding that separation has ended. My breath hitched. The rope caught it and held it for me, like a friend keeping a seat. The ladder sank an inch into nothing. The beam above my cheek throbbed. No, that was my own pulse thrown back at me by what old enough to have learned patience. The living room blurred. The bruise at my ankle flared and cooled. My wrists remembered rings that had never been there. I closed my eyes because I did not want to see the late reflection catch up and pass me. There was a room. I knew it before I saw it, the way a song is in your mouth before the first note. Smaller than mine. Same beam, closer. Same plaster, less clean. The loop hung and did not hang. It was a hole in the idea of a room, a correction made in ink. Somewhere below, a chair creaked. Somewhere above, someone counted 2, 3, 4, then began again because they had forgotten whether they were counting up or down. A voice like Harrow's but not his said, "Don't sleep under it." Another voice, younger, said, "I won't." And then a third, a woman, said, "He will." I opened my eyes to my living room, my ladder, my hands widening on the beam. The loop eased. The rope relaxed around my forearm like a snake remembering it is only rope. I climbed down, knees thawing. When my feet hit the floor, the nailhead winked and gently sank flush, as if the house had decided it could be polite for one more day. I sat on the kitchen tile and laughed softly until my throat hurt. Not joy. Not madness. Something like recognition wearing both as a mask. In the jar, the topmost disc had turned. On its hidden underside, a new number I had not scratched waited, 8. I wrote in the ledger, hands steady at last, crossing attempted. Loop allowed partial. House acknowledged. Count continues. The jar filled. Slowly at first, one disc every few nights, always announced by the bright nail nosing up through the same stretch of floor. I'd lever the board up, find the disc nested like a seed in the soil of the joists, drop it in the jar. The scrape above would grow louder after each edition, not frantic but pleased, like a clerk whose books finally balanced. By the 50th night, I had more than 20 discs. Each stamped with a bold number, each shadowed by another on the underside. The pairs were consecutive, a march towards some destination only the rope seemed to know. 0/1 2/3 4 5ths 6 7ths 8 9ths. I stopped turning them over. It didn't matter. I already knew what waited beneath, the next number, inevitable as breath. I began to feel the count in my body. The mark on my ankle darkened when I added a new disc. My wrists burned. Sometimes, waking from shallow sleep, I swore I could feel a pressure at my throat, as if a collar of air had learned to grow teeth. The rope never needed to move anymore. It hung when it wanted, coiled when it wanted, lay flat across the beam like a tame thing. But I understood now. It was not waiting for me to notice its tricks. It was waiting for me to finish the count. One morning I found the jar moved to the center of the coffee table, placed exactly beneath the loop. The discs inside rattled faintly as though stirred by unseen fingers. When I lifted the jar, the rope swayed, slow and patient, as if nodding to me. That afternoon, Harrow's words returned, "Don't sleep under the beam until you know which of you owes who." But I already knew. The house didn't owe me anything. It had been generous, lending me time, lending me silence. I was the debtor. Every scrape, every disc, every mark across my skin was an installment in a payment plan I hadn't agreed to but was bound to anyway. That night I dreamed of the count again. Only this time the reflection didn't lag. It was ahead of me, moving its lips before mine, reaching for the loop first. When I woke, the jar was empty. The discs lay scattered across the floor in a perfect circle, their numbers gleaming like teeth. In the center, the loop hung low, swaying in a rhythm that matched my breath. I don't know what compelled me to step into the circle. Maybe inevitability. Maybe the quiet pressure that had grown inside the house until it felt like gravity itself had tilted. The discs clinked under my bare feet as I crossed them, each one warm, as if it had been held in a hand just before I touched it. The loop hovered at chest height now, waiting. I told myself I wouldn't put my head through it. I only wanted to see, to know, to prove the rope's patience wasn't infinite, that it could be defied. My hands rose anyway, trembling but eager, and I slipped my arms into the loop like sleeves. The rope settled against my shoulders with the familiarity of a shawl. For a moment, nothing happened. The living room stood still, the chair, the beam, the folded bag in the corner. My heart thundered in my ears, foolish and human, and I almost laughed at myself. Then the rope tightened, just a little. Enough to remind me it was real. Enough to remind me I had asked. The air inside the loop thickened again, rippling like water under glass. And beyond it, faint but certain, I saw another room. It was the same living room, but darker, older. The plaster walls were cracked. The beams sagged as if they had been holding their breath for a century longer. And in the leather chair sat a man I didn't know, his face obscured by shadow. He stared straight ahead, unblinking, as though waiting for something to descend. He raised his hand once, palm open. And I realized with a jolt that the wrist bore the same pale band as mine. I stumbled backward, tearing free of the loop. The discs scattered as my heel kicked them, clattering into corners, under furniture. The rope swayed, loop open and patient, as though my refusal meant nothing. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, sweat soaking my shirt. My ankle burned. My throat itched. My wrists pulsed. The scrape began again above me, slow, steady, satisfied. The count wasn't finished. Not yet. The house grew 2 lives after that night, the one my body inhabited and the one I glimpsed through the loop. They overlapped like badly printed pages, ink bleeding between layers. By day, I swept, cooked, sat with books I no longer read. By night, when the scrape announced itself, I stared into the loop's trembling air and saw the darker room waiting. Sometimes it showed the man again, seated beneath the beam. Sometimes the chair was empty, cushions dented by a weight that was no longer there. Once I saw myself. Not the lagging reflection I'd grown used to, but a version of me already at peace with the rope around his neck. He looked calm, almost serene, like someone who'd made peace with the mathematics of his own ending. His feet dangled inches above the rug. His wrists bore the pale bands, darker now, ringed almost black. I couldn't tear my eyes away. When the image flickered out, I realized my own throat ached from being clenched too tightly. The discs reappeared on the coffee table, stacked in pairs like poker chips waiting for a bet. Each morning, 2 more. I stopped prying them up. The house had learned to deliver them directly. My ledger filled with numbers until the page margins bled. 0/1, February 3rd, April 5th. By now we were at 28/29. The count marched on, unmerciful and inevitable. And I began to hear whispers. Not from the rope, not from the walls, but from the spaces between the scrapes. A pause would stretch too long, and in that breathless hollow came a word, soft and shapeless, again. Sometimes yours. Other times owed. I started sleeping less. The desert outside bloomed with storms I'd barely noticed. Lightning stitched the horizon, thunder shook the windows, and still I sat beneath the beam, ledger open, waiting for the scrape. Waiting to record what could not be tallied. The house no longer felt like a building. It felt like a ledger itself, every wall a column, every beam a page, and me just another entry filling a space that had been waiting. On the 46th day, Harrow's truck rumbled back down the dirt road. Dust curled behind it like a warning. I met him at the door before he could knock, heart hammering. He squinted at me, at the shadows beneath my eyes, at the stiffness in my stance. "Still here," he said, not surprised. "The count won't stop. I blurted. It keeps leaving discs. It keeps. He lifted a hand, silencing me. You writing it down? I nodded. That's worse, he muttered. He stepped one boot onto the stoop, but no farther. Once you keep the tally, it knows you're willing to see it through. What happens when it finishes? He studied me with something like pity. When a house remembers a rope, it doesn't stop at remembering. It repeats. That's what a loop is, son. Not just the fiber. The cycle. I felt my knees weaken. How do I stop it? You don't. He set his hat back on, brim low. You decide if you're the end of the count, or just another number in it. Then he turned and walked to his truck. He didn't look back. Inside, the rope swayed gently. Luke turned toward the door as though it had heard every word. That night, the scrape didn't wait for midnight. It started at dusk, a slow grinding chorus above the beam. The discs on the table rattled, numbers shining in the half-light. The ledger lay open, pen resting in the crease. I picked it up with shaking fingers, and for the first time, I wrote not a number, not an observation, but a single sentence. I think it's my turn. The scrape didn't stop that night. It carried through until dawn, as though the rope had grown tired of pretending it needed pauses. Every drag across the beam rattled through my bones. My teeth ached like they'd been filed against stone. When the sun finally broke over the desert, the rope hung low, loop hovering a few inches above the coffee table. The discs were gone. The jar was gone. Only the ledger remained, open to the page where I had written, I think it's my turn. A new line had appeared beneath my words. I swear I hadn't written it. The ink was darker, sharper, the hand not mine. Yes. I slammed the book shut and carried it to the stove. The flame licked the edges, curling paper into black petals. But before the fire could reach the spine, the stove hissed and died, propane lines silent. The pages smoldered without burning, as though the house had claimed the ledger as its own. That evening I tried leaving. Packed the truck, drove past the wash, past the cottonwoods, past boots and beans. The desert stretched flat and endless, but the odometer didn't climb past 15 miles. I turned back to find myself pulling into the Larrabee driveway, the house crouched low and waiting, as though I'd never left. The rope was swaying when I entered, Luke brushing the top of the chair like a hand stroking a pet. The smell had shifted again, no longer flowers, no longer salt or fire. It smelled like earth freshly turned, like the raw dirt of an open grave. I collapsed into the chair. The loop dangled above me, swaying, circling, patient. Just finish it, I whispered. My throat hurt. My wrists burned. The band on my ankle pulsed. Whatever the count is, just finish it. The rope stilled. The scrape ceased. For the first time in weeks, the house exhaled. Then, softly, from somewhere inside the beam, came a voice I recognized as my own, delayed, smiling. One more. The nail pushed through the floor at midnight. Bright, clean, eager. I didn't bother with the hammer. I pried the board with my bare hands until splinters pierced my palms. Beneath the joist lay a single disc. Larger than the others, heavy as a river stone. On its face, the number 98. On the underside, scratched faintly, 99. I understood, with a clarity sharper than fear, that the count would not stop at 99. It was waiting for me to supply the final number. I set the disc on the table. The rope lowered, loop brushing it once like a kiss. Then it rose again, steady, waiting. The reflection in the south window had returned. It no longer lagged. It was ahead, lips moving before mine, eyes widening in anticipation. When I reached for the disc, it reached faster, claiming it first. I dropped my hand. The reflection smiled. The scrape began again, slow, deliberate, almost gentle. A lullaby in rough timber. I sat in the chair and closed my eyes. My breath matched the rhythm. My wrists tingled. My throat itched. My ankle burned. The house held its breath, waiting for me to complete the count. Waiting for me to be 100. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair beneath the beam, the disc heavy in my palm. The rope swayed above me, the loop dark against the pale plaster, patient as ever. The scrape had slowed, stretched, like a clock nearing its final tick. The ledger was open on the table, pages crammed with pairs of numbers. The last entry I'd written was 98/99. There was only one line left on the page. The rope wanted me to finish it. I could feel the weight of its expectation pressing down, the way you feel air shift before a storm. My skin burned where the pale rings circled me, wrist, ankle, throat. All debts marked. All installments paid. Only the last number remained. I lifted the pen. My hand trembled. The rope stilled, as though waiting. I wrote it. 100. The pen snapped in my grip, ink spilling across the page like blood. The ledger closed on its own, a clap of finality that echoed through the room. The loop descended, slow, deliberate, until it hovered inches from my face. The smell of earth rose thick and wet, choking, undeniable. And then silence. No scrape. No creak. Only the sound of my heart, frantic, and the faint rasp of my own breath. The reflection in the south window moved first. It stepped into the loop, calm, certain, lifting its chin in obedience. The rope tightened around its neck, pulling it upward until its feet dangled. And then I felt it, pressure cinching my throat though no rope touched me. My vision narrowed. My lungs clawed for air. My reflection's face purpled, eyes bulging. My own vision blurred with tears. I tried to stand, to push the chair away, but the chair held me, leather gripping like hands. My wrists jerked upward, invisible tethers dragging them to the beam. My ankle throbbed with each pulse, locked in place. The loop swayed, satisfied. The house exhaled once, deeply, as if relieved to have its account settled. Then, release. The rope slackened. My chest heaved air. I collapsed forward, coughing, hands clutching at a throat unmarked. The reflection was gone. The window showed only the desert night, still and indifferent. On the table lay the disc, its numbers faded to nothing, blank brass reflecting the beam. The ledger was closed. The rope hung still. The count was finished. Morning came quiet. Too quiet. No scrape. No loop swaying. No smell of earth. The house sat in its silence, as if emptied of everything it had carried. I thought it was over. But when I stepped outside, the desert stretched wrong. The wash ran in the opposite direction. The cottonwoods bent away from me. Boots and beans was gone, replaced by a boarded storefront with no name. My phone showed no service. The date on the screen was unreadable, the numbers flickering like static. When I returned inside, the chair was gone. The table gone. Only the beam remained, black and heavy, cutting the ceiling in two. And from somewhere high above, faint but deliberate, came the scrape. Not slow this time. Not patient. Faster, as though the cycle had begun again. I looked down. A nail pushed through the floorboard. Bright. Clean. Waiting. The nail gleamed in the morning light like a needle puncturing skin. I knelt, heart already hammering, and pried up the board with raw fingers. Dust rose in lazy spirals, sunlight catching it like ash. Beneath the joist lay a brass disc, just as before. But this one wasn't numbered. Its face was blank, polished to a mirror sheen. When I lifted it, my reflection stared back, warped, stretched, mouth open in a silent scream. I dropped it, and the sound rang too long, echoing as though it had fallen down a well hidden beneath the floor. The scrape continued overhead. Not the patient, measured draw I had grown used to, but quicker, eager, like claws raking a door. My ledger, closed after the 100th entry, sat on the table again. Its cover shivered as though something beneath wanted out. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The pages were blank. Every number, every note, every frantic scrawl I had made was gone. Only a single sentence filled the center of the first page, in that same sharp hand I didn't recognize. Begin again. The rope swayed above me, loop wide, expectant. I staggered back, bile sour in my throat. No, I said aloud, voice cracking. It's finished. You're finished. The scrape paused. Silence fell heavy, as though the house were considering my defiance. For a moment, I believed I had won. Then, softly, the loop lowered until it brushed my shoulder. The smell that rose from it was no longer flowers or salt or earth. It was the sour, sweet stench of rot, like meat left out in the desert sun, crawling with flies I couldn't see. The blank disc rolled toward my feet. I tried to kick it aside, but it stuck to my skin as though magnetized. The cold of it seeped into me, climbing up my leg until my knee buckled. I stumbled, caught myself on the chair. My vision swam. And in the south window, my reflection returned, delayed again, smiling its too wide smile, already holding the rope. The ledger's pages turned themselves, blank lines waiting to be filled. The count was gone, but not erased. Only reset? The house didn't want an ending. It wanted repetition. A loop. I told myself I wouldn't touch the ledger, wouldn't touch the blank disc, wouldn't listen to the scrape. But the house had learned me too well. It knew how to wait. The scrape resumed at dusk, faster now, insistent. The rope swayed above the beam like a pendulum marking time. The blank disc clung to my ankle until the skin there went numb, a ring of frost burning into flesh. I tried prying it off, clawing with nails, even pressing a knife's edge beneath it, but it sank deeper, becoming part of me. When I pressed my finger against it, it pulsed like a second heart. The ledger lay open on the table. Its pages weren't just blank anymore, they were waiting. Lines shimmered faintly in the dim light, as if ink would appear the moment I set pen to paper. By midnight, the reflection in the south window was restless. It paced while I sat frozen in the chair. Its mouth opened and closed, shapes forming that I could not hear. Then it stopped, turned toward me, and pointed, directly at the ledger. "Why me?" My voice cracked in the empty room. "Why not finish with the last one? Why not let it end?" The rope swayed lower. The smell of rot thickened, clinging to my clothes, my hair, filling my lungs until I gagged. The scrape grew louder, sharper, like a saw biting through wood. The reflection leaned closer to the glass, face pressing against it until the skin distorted grotesquely. Its lips moved again, slower this time, and I understood. Right. My hand shook as I picked up the pen. The rope stilled above me, watching. The reflection smiled, relief spreading across its warped face. I touched the pen to the first line of the ledger. My body betrayed me, writing a number before I could resist. 1. The scrape stopped. The rope swayed gently, satisfied. The stench receded, leaving only silence. I dropped the pen, my heart hammering. My throat burned where the pale ring had deepened. My ankle throbbed with the cold of the embedded disc. The ledger glowed faintly, a promise of what it expected next. The cycle had started again. And this time, I understood, there would be no final number. Only the loop. The days blurred. I marked them not by sunrises or sunsets but by numbers. Each night, a nail surfaced. Each morning, a disc gleamed beneath the floor. This time they weren't pairs. They were singular, solitary, etched with only one figure. 1, 2, 3. The ledger filled line by line. My handwriting grew tighter, smaller, as though I were trying to conserve space against infinity. The pages no longer turned normally. They refilled themselves as soon as I reached the end, new paper sliding from the spine like flesh knitting over a wound. The reflection grew bolder. It no longer lagged. Now it anticipated, moving seconds before me, sometimes minutes. I'd reach for a cup, and in the window my hand would already be lifting it, sipping from it, setting it down with deliberate calm. When I tried to resist, refusing to follow, it would stare at me, lips pressed in, until the compulsion broke me and I mirrored its action. The rope watched all of this, swaying in approval. At times it hung so low that the loop brushed the top of my head, static crackling across my scalp. I started ducking when I walked beneath it, but that only made the reflection grin wider, its lips stretching too far, teeth gleaming white against the glass. On the 10th night of the second count, I found a disc waiting not under the nail, but on the pillow beside me. It bore the number 11. When I picked it up, the rope twitched, tightening as though eager. By then I had stopped pretending I was free. My only rebellion was delay. I'd hold the pen over the page for hours, hand cramping, sweat dripping, before I let it fall. The rope always rewarded me with silence afterward, but the reflections grinned sharpened each time, as though amused by my tiny victories. One morning, desperate, I dragged the jar of discs into the desert. I scattered them among the rocks, flung them into the wash, buried them beneath mesquite roots. By the time I returned, panting and sunburned, the jar sat on the coffee table again, fuller than before. The discs clinked as though laughing. The ledger waited. My wrist throbbed with the faint burn of a new pale ring. I wrote 12. The rope swayed, pleased. The reflection mouthed a word I didn't want to hear, but understood all the same. Forever. By the 15th entry of the second count, the house had learned to whisper. Not words, not exactly, numbers. They came from the rafters, soft as breath. Sometimes from beneath the floor. Sometimes from the walls themselves, the plaster vibrating with the faint hum of counting. At first it was only the next number, urging me forward, 16, 17. But soon it spiraled beyond the page, whispering numbers far ahead, digits I hadn't yet reached. It was like standing in a river, hearing the current describe the path downstream. The rope swayed harder each night. Its fibers creaked, taut and eager. The smell of rot had mellowed into something worse, a sweetness, cloying, like honey poured over something already spoiled. I breathed it in my sleep, woke with it coating my tongue. The reflection thrived in this atmosphere. It no longer grinned, now it spoke, lips forming shapes in the glass. At first I couldn't understand, but after days of listening the words slipped through. Don't fight it. Don't slow. The numbers are all that matter. On the 20th night I tried. I left the ledger closed, the pen untouched. I sat outside under the stars, the desert wind brushing my face, coyotes howling far off. For a few hours, I felt almost free. But when I stepped back inside, the ledger was already open, the next number written neatly in my own handwriting, though my hand had never touched the page. 21. I flipped ahead. More numbers filled the lines, 22, 23, 24, an entire week already accounted for. The handwriting grew tighter, more frantic, like mine but accelerated, as if I'd rushed through sleepless nights to catch up. The rope swayed above the beam, loop glinting in the half-light. The reflection clapped silently in the glass, as though proud of me. I tried tearing out the pages. They dissolved in my hands, the ash of burned paper falling between my fingers, only for the ledger to refill itself, whole and waiting. That night I dreamed of a tower of discs stretching into the sky, each etched with a number. At the top, unseen, the rope dangled, loop waiting for me. The reflection climbed ahead of me, disc by disc, laughing. When I woke, my wrists bore fresh rings, darker than before, as if the dream had left shackles behind. The ledger glowed faintly, expectant. I wrote 25. And the whispering stopped, satisfied for now. By the 30th entry of the second count, I no longer trusted the south window. I draped a blanket across it, nailed the corners into plaster, sealed the glass behind a barrier of fabric. But it didn't matter. At night, the blanket bulged inward, as though something leaned from the other side, pressing its face against the cloth. When the moonlight was strong, I could still see its outline, the curve of a grin stretched too wide, the hollows where eyes should be. The whispers grew bolder too. They no longer stuck to numbers. They tried words again. Faint, slurred, hard to catch, but I understood enough. Yours, ode, finish. I tried shouting back once, voice raw in the cavernous room. No! The echoes rebounded until it sounded like a crowd arguing with me. The rope above swayed violently, beam groaning with its weight. The ledger slammed shut. And then, just as quickly, silence returned, heavy as sleep. For 2 days, the rope didn't move. No scrape. No swaying. No whispers. I thought, stupidly, that I had broken it. I dared to hope. But on the third night, I woke to find the blanket gone from the window. The reflection was there, closer than ever, its grin calm, serene, not monstrous at all. It raised a hand to its throat, tapped the pale band there, then pointed at me. The ledger was open again. The pen lay across its spine like a finger waiting to be grasped. A new number had been written without me, 37. My heart stuttered. The count had advanced without my hand. It didn't need me anymore. It only needed my presence, my acknowledgement. My debt wasn't in the writing. It was in the being. The rope lowered until the loop brushed my forehead, a parody of a blessing. The smell of sweetness grew so thick it made my eyes water. My throat itched. My wrists burned. My ankle pulsed with the embedded disc. And in the window, my reflection mouthed a word that I finally heard, clear as if spoken in my own voice. Soon. By the 40th entry, days no longer felt separate. Morning bled into night without transition. The scrape no longer waited for midnight. It murmured constantly, a low metronome ticking beneath everything I did. I tried marking time on the wall, slashing lines with a nail pulled from the floor. But when I slept and woke again, the marks had multiplied, rows upon rows, too neat to be mine, stretching floor to ceiling. Each slash bore a faint number, etched in a hand smaller, tighter than my own. I stopped counting after 100. The ledger reflected this collapse. Pages filled themselves ahead of me, spilling numbers deep into the future. 50, 51, 52. Entire months accounted for in a single night. When I tried tearing it apart, the paper bled ink that crawled up my arms, staining the pale rings around my wrists into darker shackles. I started dreaming of other caretakers. A woman with gray hair, seated in the same leather chair, rope loop hanging above her. A boy no older than 17, tears drying on his cheeks as he scribbled numbers in a notebook. A soldier, uniform stained with desert dust, muttering the count under his breath like a prayer. Each dream ended the same, the loop tightening, their faces blurring into mine. The rope seemed taller now. When I looked up, the beam stretched higher than the house could hold, vanishing into shadows that had no ceiling. The loop swayed in that darkness, larger each night, as though feeding on the count itself. The whispers grew bolder, voices overlapping in a chorus. Begin again. Begin again. Begin again. My reflection had stopped grinning. It only stared, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. Sometimes, when I blinked, it wasn't in the window at all. It was sitting across from me in the chair, mirroring my every movement half a second ahead. I tried to touch it once. My hand passed through the glass, through the reflection's chest, and into something cold and wet that made my bones ache. I yanked back, skin pale where it had touched me. The ledger flipped itself open again. The next line glowed faintly, waiting. I picked up the pen. My hand moved without my permission. 41. The rope creaked, satisfied. And time contracted further. By the 45th entry, the line between waking and dream was gone. I saw the others not only at night, but in the corners of daylight. They flickered in the kitchen doorway, appeared in the hall mirror, crowded the living room until I could barely breathe. The boy sat cross-legged on the rug, ledger balanced on his knees, whispering the numbers as he wrote. His voice cracked, raw from repetition. The woman rocked in the leather chair, rope loop brushing her silver hair. The soldier leaned against the beam, eyes hollow, muttering under his breath, again. 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 They never looked at me directly, but their movements lined up with mine, lifting the pen when I did, scratching numbers when I did. The ledger on my table wasn't just mine. It was theirs too, all of ours, one endless record written by too many hands. When I closed my eyes, I saw more of them. Dozens. Hundreds. A parade of caretakers stretching backward through time, each shackled by the same pale rings on their wrists, ankles, throats. Each bound to the loop. Each certain they were the last. The whispers confirmed it. Not the first. Never the last. I tried to ask the soldier once, lips trembling, voice nearly gone. How long? He didn't answer. He only held up his palm. 5 fingers. Then he folded 1. 4. Then another. 3. His eyes never left mine as he counted down. When he reached 0, the rope creaked above me. The loop dropped lower, brushing my chest. I screamed and shoved the ledger away. The pages fanned open, glowing numbers crawling across them, rushing ahead faster than I could read. 46, 47, 48, 49. The ink spilled off the edges, dripping to the floor, staining the discs scattered beneath the table. My reflection appeared in the window again. Not grinning now, but solemn, almost mournful. It tapped the glass with one pale finger, once for each number rushing past. The sound echoed in my skull like hammer blows. When the ledger finally stilled, the last number written was 50. The rope swayed violently overhead, fibers groaning, as though celebrating. The boy on the rug began to cry. The woman closed her eyes. The soldier lowered his head. And I realized with horror that all 3 were watching me, waiting for me to join them. After the 50th entry, the house no longer felt like walls and beams. It felt like a body. The scrape was its pulse, the rope its tongue, the ledger its memory. And me, just another cell repeating the same function over and over. The others no longer stayed in the corners. They sat beside me, shoulder to shoulder, each with their own phantom ledger. When I lifted the pen, so did they. When I hesitated, their hands trembled in unison, desperate for me to move. It was as if my will anchored them, and they resented me for slowing. At night, the loop grew so large it filled the room. I could see the threads of it quivering, tight with anticipation. I dreamed of stepping into it, dreamed of the relief on their faces when I finally surrendered. Each morning I woke with the rope burns darker, my throat raw as though something had cinched me while I slept. The reflection changed too. It no longer mirrored me at all. It acted freely now, moving while I stayed still. Sometimes it stood with its back to me, writing numbers directly on the glass. The ink shimmered like frost. Sometimes it stared with hollow eyes, mouthing words I knew but refused to hear. Ode. Yours. And, on the 55th night, the boy reached out and touched my hand. His skin was cold, brittle, like paper left in water. "It's easier if you stop fighting," he whispered. His voice sounded like mine, only younger, raw with fear. The woman leaned close to my ear. "It always comes to this," she breathed. Her breath smelled of lilies turned sour. The soldier only watched, lips moving silently, counting down again, fingers folding one by one. I shouted at them, "Leave me alone!" But my voice didn't carry. It bounced back, thinner, until I wasn't sure if I'd said anything at all. The rope dropped lower. The loop hovered directly in front of my face now, swaying gently as though breathing with me. The smell of rot and sweetness filled my lungs. The ledger flipped open to a blank page. The pen rose in my hand. My fingers moved though I fought to hold them still. 56. The other sighed, a chorus of relief. The rope creaked in satisfaction. And I understood then, I wasn't just watching them. I was joining them. One more caretaker in the endless line, bound to the loop, my reflection already rehearsing my place in the circle. By the 60th entry, I could no longer tell where my skin ended and the rope began. Every scrape overhead felt like it came from inside me, bones dragging across themselves. My hands shook constantly, fingertips stained with ink that never washed away. The ledger drank every mark greedily, pages filling faster than I could breathe. The others had grown bolder. They no longer flickered, they were solid, present, breathing in time with me. The boy's tears streaked my own cheeks. The woman's sighs rattled in my chest. The soldier's countdown throbbed in my pulse. They weren't beside me anymore. They were inside me, stitched into the loops of my veins. The reflection sealed the truth. It no longer stood across the glass. It sat in the chair, posture relaxed, rope loops swaying above its head. When I looked into its eyes, I saw not one person, but many, faces layered like reflections in a stack of windows. The boy, the woman, the soldier. Strangers I'd never met but recognized anyway, their pale rings glowing faintly. And in the center of them all, me. The rope lowered again. I could smell the hemp now, raw and ancient, fibers swollen with sweat and tears. The loop hovered at my throat. My breath hitched, and the others breathed with me. When I tried to stand, my legs refused. The leather chair gripped me, deep as a grave. The ledger turned another page. The pen rose. My hand followed. 61. The scrape above intensified, faster, frantic, no longer patient. It wanted more. It wanted all of me. "Stop," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I'm still me." The reflection smiled sadly. It mouthed the word "not anymore." The boy laughed then, thin and broken. The woman's head tilted back in surrender. The soldier snapped to attention, saluting something unseen. The rope twitched. The loop brushed my throat. Cold fire spread across the pale ring until it burned like a collar forged from ice and iron. And as I gasped, pen falling from my hand, I realized the ledger no longer needed me. The ink was moving on its own, scrawling line after line in 1,000 overlapping hands. The scrape turned into a chorus of whispers. Again. 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 The loop tightened, not yet fully, but enough for me to know how it would feel when it did. And in that strangling moment, I understood, the loop didn't erase you. It multiplied you. I wasn't disappearing. I was dissolving, becoming part of the count forever. By the 65th entry, I could no longer trust my own hands. Sometimes I'd look down and see the boy's thin fingers gripping the pen. Other times, the woman's arthritic knuckles scratched across the page. Once I saw the soldier's broad hand, veins roped with strain, writing in blocky letters not my own. The ledger didn't care whose hand held the pen. It only cared that the count continued. The rope lowered further each night. It no longer swayed, it pulsed, in rhythm with my heartbeat. The loop hovered so close to my throat that every exhale brushed the coarse fibers. I'd wake with strands of hemp clinging to my lips, though I swore I hadn't moved in my sleep. The whispers shifted too. They no longer repeated just again. They began stringing together fragments of sentences. "We are the count. You are the next. The loop is never empty." I caught myself mouthing them during the day, lips moving silently as I swept dust from the floor or fetched water from the tap. Sometimes the words slipped out loud, my voice braided with others, a chorus of tones that weren't mine. The reflection confirmed the worst. When I looked into the window now, it wasn't a mirror. It was a doorway. On the other side I saw the room filled with caretakers, dozens, maybe hundreds, each with ledgers open, each beneath their own loop. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and their mouths moved in unison. Counting. Always counting. When I leaned closer, the reflection leaned back, not mocking, but inviting. Its grin was gone. Its face was mine, softened with surrender. Its lips formed a word that rattled my bones. Join. The ledger flipped itself open again. Numbers scrawled across the page in a frenzy, too fast to follow, ink spilling over the edges, dripping to the floor. The disc scattered there began to hum, vibrating like struck bells. The rope tightened once, not enough to choke but enough to mark me. A welt bloomed across my throat, raw and stinging. I touched it with trembling fingers. The others, boy, woman, soldier, touched their own throats in perfect unison. The house exhaled, long and deep, as though pleased with the progress. I knew then that my individuality was already gone. Piece by piece, I was merging into the loop's archive, another voice in the endless chorus. The scrape slowed again, patient, waiting for me to stop resisting the final step. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to resist. By the 70th entry, the boundary between me and the reflection thinned to nothing. The window no longer held glass. It rippled like water, shimmering with every breath I took. On the other side I saw them all, the boy, the woman, the soldier, and countless others stretching back into shadow, their faces pale, their throats circled by rings that glowed faintly like brands. They no longer waited in silence. They beckoned. Hands reached toward me through the ripple, fingers twitching with impatience. The reflection, my double, stood at the center, calm, serene, its smile tender now, almost merciful. Join! It mouthed again. The word reverberated through the room as if the walls themselves had spoken. The rope tightened against my throat, urging me forward. My body moved before my mind agreed, steps slow and dreamlike. I reached the window. My hand pressed to the surface. The ripples spread outward in concentric rings, cool and wet, soaking my palm. Behind me, the ledger turned pages in a frenzy, the pen scratching without hands to guide it. Numbers spilled across the floorboards, glowing faintly before searing themselves into the wood. The discs rattled violently, leaping like coins shaken in a jar. The boy's voice whispered behind my ear, "Don't look back." The woman's voice followed, "It's easier this way." The soldier's voice concluded, "Orders are orders." I leaned forward. My reflection leaned to meet me, our faces inches apart, breath fogging the barrier between us. For the first time, I heard it speak aloud, my own voice, but hollowed, older, heavier. "You are already here." And then the glass gave way. My hand sank through, then my arm, then my face. Cold engulfed me, thick and suffocating, like plunging into a frozen river. I gasped, but the liquid air filled my lungs without drowning me. On the other side, the caretakers closed in. Their hands brushed my shoulders, my back, my arms, guiding me into their circle. The boy smiled, her tracks gleaming silver. The woman nodded in solemn approval. The soldier clapped my shoulder once, firm, final. I turned back instinctively, seeking the living room, the beam, the chair. But the window was gone. Only darkness stretched behind me, endless and absolute. The loop hovered above us all, vast and infinite, a great ring of woven shadows that swallowed the sky. Every caretaker stood beneath it, every voice counting in unison, the sound endless, eternal. And when I opened my mouth, I counted 2. 71. The loop shivered with satisfaction. The sound struck me first. Not a single scrape anymore, but an ocean of voices, thousands layered over thousands, all chanting numbers. Some spoke softly, reverent as prayer. Others shouted, ragged with desperation. Yet every voice aligned in rhythm, one endless count spiraling upward. The space was vast, a cathedral carved from shadow. Above us, the loop loomed impossibly large, spanning the sky like a black sun. Its fibers writhed as though alive, threads stretching out to tether each caretaker by the throat, the wrists, the ankles. We stood in concentric circles beneath it, all bound, all counting. I looked around at the faces. They weren't just the boy, the woman, the soldier. They were countless others from every time, every place. A miner with coal dust etched into his skin. A nurse in blood-stained scrubs. A farmer in overalls stiff with mud. All of them marked. All of them chanting. When my number came, my lips moved without thought. 72. The word left my mouth in harmony with theirs, absorbed into the vast choir. The loop above shivered with pleasure, threads tightening, feeding on the sound. The boy leaned toward me, whisper lost in the tide but clear in my head. "It doesn't stop. It never stops." The woman's hand brushed mine, brittle and warm. "We are its memory," she murmured. "Each of us a page in the ledger." The soldier's gaze met mine, hollow but resolute. "Orders are orders. The count must continue." The ledger appeared in my hands, though I hadn't carried it across. Its pages fluttered open, numbers scrawled in countless scripts, stacked atop one another until they blurred into black masses of ink. New pages forced themselves into existence, parchment tearing free of the spine, waiting for more. I tried closing it, but my reflection, myself, stood across from me, ledger open, pen scratching furiously. The two books mirrored one another, each page filling as the other turned. When I tried to drop mine, the loop tightened around my throat. My knees buckled, vision blackening. I lifted it again, and the pressure eased. The message was clear. The count was not a choice. It was the only law here. I felt the ink spread across my fingers, seeping into my veins, tracing lines of numbers beneath my skin. My heart kept pace with the chant. 73. The loop pulsed above us all, threads trembling like a vast heartbeat. I understood then that the loop was not just rope. It was a machine. A god. a prison. And we, caretakers, reflections, echoes, were its endless archive. The chant pressed on me like a tide. Each number rolled into the next, erasing thought, erasing will. 74. 75. 76. My lips moved in sync, but my mind clawed for gaps, tiny moments where the rhythm faltered. If I could find one, maybe I could wedge myself free. I tried holding my breath on 77. My voice caught, silence scraping my throat. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd done it. But the loop above quivered, fibers creaking, and the tether at my neck constricted. My chest seized. Black spots crawled across my vision. When I gasped out 78, the pressure eased. The loop demanded compliance. Still, I tried other rebellions. I whispered instead of shouting. I slurred the numbers, twisted them backward, mouthed words instead. Help, stop, no. But each time, the loop punished me. The rope bands on my wrists burned until blisters rose. My ankle ached as though nailed to the floor. My throat closed tight, forcing sound from me like water through a broken dam. The others noticed. The boy shook his head, eyes wide with fear. Don't fight, he mouthed. It makes it worse. The woman wept softly, tears silvering her face. The soldier's hand gripped my shoulder like a vice, forcing me to keep rhythm. When I tried to pull away, his lips brushed my ear. You think you're the first to resist? We all tried. We all failed. The loop doesn't break. I looked up at the vast ring. Its threads writhed like serpents, glistening with sweat, blood, and ink. It was endless, a horizon that circled us completely. But I noticed something, a faint seam, a darker place where two fibers overlapped. It pulsed slower, weaker, almost like a scar. Hope flickered. The next number came. 79. My lips obeyed, but my eyes stayed fixed on that seam. If the loop was alive, it could be wounded. And if it could be wounded, maybe it could be ended. But even as the thought formed, the reflection stepped forward from the crowd. My own face, my own eyes, smiling faintly. It shook its head once, slow, deliberate. Don't, it whispered, voice audible above the chant, though no one else seemed to hear. The seam is the trap. It's how it keeps you looking. It wants you to believe there's a way out. The next number thundered through the choir. 80. My throat spoke it. My heart whispered rebellion. And the loop trembled, as though it had heard both. The seam pulsed above me, darker than the rest of the loop, beating slow as if daring me to notice. Each throb made the fibers around it ripple, trembling like a wound that refused to heal. The chant pressed on, 81, 82, 83, but my gaze refused to leave that scar. The reflection noticed. It broke rhythm, stepping close, whispering urgently in my own voice. It's bait. That's how it hooks you deeper. Don't look at it. But I couldn't stop. My throat kept counting while my mind clawed at the thought. Every wound is a weakness. Every weakness can be broken. The boy tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide with terror. I tried. He breathed, so faintly the chant almost drowned him. I thought it was a door, but it just pulled me closer. He turned his head, showing where the pale ring on his throat had bitten so deep it had become a scar of bone. It doesn't let go. The woman leaned near next, her hair brushing my cheek like cobwebs. It's older than us, she whispered. Older than the house, older than the land. You can't wound what doesn't end. The soldier's hand clamped my shoulder, hard enough to bruise. His lips brushed my ear, voice firm, absolute. Orders are orders. The seam is the noose tightening. But the seam pulsed again, and I swore I heard something beneath the chant. Not numbers this time. Words. Break me. The loop shivered as if in pain. A deep vibration rippled through every tether, rattling the discs at our feet. Some caretakers faltered in their counting. A few even stumbled, voices cracking, eyes darting toward the seam. The reflection snarled, its face splitting in fury. Don't listen! It screamed, though no one else reacted. It lies. It always lies! The chant surged louder, drowning the whisper. 84, 85, 86. But the voice returned, softer, buried in the rhythm. Break me. Free us. The loop above trembled violently, threads writhing like snakes caught in fire. My throat strained to keep up with the chant. My wrists burned. My ankle bled. But still the thought rooted deep. If it could ask for release, maybe it could be broken. I raised my eyes to the seam and whispered, just once, against the tide of numbers. How? The loop convulsed. The choir stuttered. For the first time since I had crossed into this place, the count faltered, and the darkness inside the seam opened like an eye. The seam dilated. What I thought was shadow yawned wide, opening into a hollow blackness deeper than the desert night. It pulsed once, twice, then locked onto me. I felt it, not sight, but pressure, a weight settling behind my ribs, inside my skull. The loop had opened an eye, and it was staring straight through me. The chant staggered. Voices around me stumbled over numbers. 87. 88. Faltered into silence, then resumed with panicked urgency, as if terrified of what might happen if the rhythm stopped entirely. The boy collapsed to his knees, hands clamped over his ears, mouthing "Make it stop." The woman clutched her ledger to her chest like a shield. The soldier shouted the count louder, trying to drown out the rupture. But I couldn't look away. Inside the seam, the blackness shifted. Shapes moved, ropes, yes, but not rope. There were tendons, veins, an anatomy too vast to comprehend. The loop wasn't just a construct. It was alive, a colossal organism whose body stretched beyond walls, beyond earth, beyond time. We were nothing but its organs, caretakers serving as cells, each counting to keep its pulse steady. The eye blinked, and the voice came again, not whispering now, but resonant, echoing in marrow and thought alike. Break me. Tear the ledger. Burn the numbers. Starve me of the count. The ledger in my hands quivered, pages fluttering as if in a storm. Ink bled upward, letters twisting into claws, trying to grip me. My reflection howled from the crowd, shoving through the others, face contorted with rage. Don't listen! It screamed, its voice my own but sharpened, hateful. It tricks every one of us. That's how it grows. You stop counting, and it devours you whole. The boy lifted his tear-streaked face, desperate. Please, if you can, try. None of us could. The woman shook her head violently, eyes rolling white. He'll only feed it more. The soldier's hand crushed my shoulder. His mouth close to my ear, he hissed. You disobey, you die. And here, death is worse than counting. The loop throbbed, fibers shuddering like muscle in spasm. The eye in the seam widened, gaze devouring me. My throat constricted, voice ready to spill the next number, but I clenched my teeth, fighting. For the first time, I resisted the chant. The world stilled. The others froze mid-word. The boy's lips stuck half open. The woman's sob cut silent. The soldier's hand turned to stone on my shoulder. Only the reflection moved, staggering toward me, face splitting into a grotesque grin. The loop shook violently overhead, every fiber screaming. The seam burned brighter, a wound torn wider. I opened the ledger. The pages writhed, numbers crawling like ants. My hands trembled. Break me, the voice pleaded again. And with a cry that wasn't mine, I tore the ledger in half. The scream that followed was not human. It was the house, the desert, the sky, the loop itself. The ledger ripped down the spine with a sound like thunder cracking bone. Pages exploded outward, a storm of ink and parchment spiraling into the air. Each fragment bore a number, glowing faintly, and as they scattered the chant collapsed. The others fell silent. The boy's mouth hung open. The woman clutched her chest, gasping like she'd been unhooked from a machine. The soldier's voice died in his throat, eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time since I had crossed, the room was quiet. Too quiet. The loop above convulsed. Fibers writhed like worms in fire. The eye in the seam flared open, burning with impossible light. The voice poured through me, no longer a whisper, no longer pleading. You starve me. The floor buckled. Discs shattered into dust, scattering like ash across our feet. The tether around my ankle dissolved, leaving the skin raw, bleeding. My wrists burned as though flayed open. My throat seared, the pale ring splitting into a raw wound. Some caretakers collapsed. The boy curled into himself, whispering nonsense. The woman screamed until her voice cracked, clawing at her ledger as it disintegrated in her hands. The soldier roared, defiant, lifting empty fists toward the loop as if still saluting. The reflection lunged at me. Its face was mine but stretched too wide, lips peeled back to show teeth sharp as broken glass. It slammed into me, cold and wet, forcing me back against the beam. "You've done it now," it hissed. "You've cut the vein. Do you know what happens when you bleed a god?" The loop shrieked. Fibers snapped like snapped cables, whipping through the crowd. Each strike left welts, tore flesh, split skin. Caretakers fell in droves, their forms unraveling into smoke. The boy dissolved into a spray of numbers. The woman burst into a cloud of ink, staining the air. The soldiers shattered like glass, fragments of uniform and bone raining around me. I screamed, but no sound came. The air had been stolen, devoured by the loop's hunger. The seam pulsed wider, sucking everything toward it. Pages, ledgers, caretakers, dragged into its yawning eye. The reflection gripped my throat with my own hands, squeezing until stars danced in my vision. "You wanted to break it?" it spat. "Then be the sacrifice it demands." The loop above cracked open. Not rope, not wood, not shadow. Flesh. Tendons. A wound torn in the sky. From it poured not light, not darkness, but both, braided into a torrent of endless, screaming numbers. "Count for me," the voice bellowed, filling marrow and thought. "Or end with me." My body convulsed. My lips trembled. The next number rose unbidden, searing my tongue. 89. The loop stilled, listening. The reflection smiled, triumphant. And I realized the tear hadn't freed me. It had made me the new ledger. When the voice claimed me, it wasn't from above. It was inside. My skin crawled with ink, black veins etching themselves across my arms, my chest, my throat. The pale rings were gone now, replaced by script that coiled tighter with every breath. The floor vanished. The house, the beam, the desert, all torn away like scenery stripped from a stage. I floated in nothing, surrounded by the tatters of ledgers that once were. Their pages circled me like vultures, each one screaming numbers in jagged voices. The reflection hovered before me, no longer tethered to glass. It was free, its grin gone, replaced with something worse, calm. Acceptance. "You are the book now," it said softly, almost tender. "Every page. Every mark. Every debt." The seam pulsed within me, not above. I felt it in my ribs, a hollow wound that throbbed with hunger. Each beat demanded sound, demanded continuation. 90. The number slipped from my lips before I knew it. The fragments of caretakers still drifting nearby stirred. The boy's tear-streaked face flickered back into shape, the woman's outline wavered, the soldier's hand rose again in salute. Each of them breathed out the same number with me, voices layering into one. 90. And the loop shivered in satisfaction. "No," I whispered, clutching my chest, feeling the script burrow deeper. "I won't." But the voice inside me thundered, drowning thought. "You will. You already are. You always were." I saw it then, the truth I hadn't wanted to face. The caretakers hadn't been victims pulled in by chance. They were iterations. Each one the same, each one believing they could resist, each one dissolving into the ledger until all that remained was the loop's memory. And now it was my turn to carry the book forward. The reflection leaned close, pressing its forehead against mine. Its voice was my voice, steady and absolute. "You are the Count." The darkness swelled. The seams split wider inside me, ribs cracking as numbers poured from my mouth, endless and merciless. 91, 92, 93. The caretakers joined, their ruined voices weaving into mine. The void quaked with the rhythm. And the loop was no longer something I stared up at. It was my body. My throat. My endless, hungering voice. The numbers would not stop. They poured from my mouth like blood from a wound, thick and metallic, tasting of rust. 94, 95, 96. Each syllable etched itself deeper into my bones, my marrow turning black with ink. The caretakers hovered around me, their bodies dissolving into streams of script. The boy's tears became digits. The woman's breath unraveled into equations. The soldier's salute stiffened, then shattered into a spray of symbols. They were no longer people, just annotations, footnotes absorbed into the endless book I had become. The reflection stood nearest, solid where the others had faded. Its hand pressed against my chest, fingers sinking into the script as though my flesh were parchment. "You see it now," it whispered, my own voice folded back into my ears. "The loop is not outside you. The loop is you. You are its throat, its ledger, its count." I tried to scream, to spit the numbers out, but they returned in a flood. My tongue blistered with digits. My lungs rattled with syllables. I coughed ink, black rivulets running down my chin, staining the void beneath me. The seam throbbed in my chest, pulsing wider, hungrier. I felt the tug of the void, reaching through me, calling for more caretakers to join. Faces pressed against the dark, new reflections, strangers, yet all of them wore the pale rings at their throats. They were waiting. They were coming. I clawed at myself, nails raking across ribs that now felt like bars of a cage. My body wasn't mine, it was architecture. A house built from marrow and rope. The beam was my spine. The loop was my throat. The voice roared inside me. "You are the house. You are the beam. You are the rope. You are the ledger. There is no end to you." And with those words I felt the desert again. The Larrabee house squatting low, windows blank. The chair waiting beneath the beam. The coffee table bare except for a notebook that pulsed faintly, eager for the first mark. Somewhere outside, a truck engine approached. Tires crunched over gravel. A new caretaker was arriving. My mouth opened against my will, breath leaking like a draft through the rafters. 1. The loop tightened in pleasure. And I understood, with horror absolute. I had become the trap. Headlights cut through the desert dusk, twin beams bouncing along the rutted road. A pickup rattled to a stop beside the Larrabee house, engine ticking in the heat. A door creaked, slammed. Boots crunched gravel. "Quiet," a voice muttered. "Young, weary?" A student maybe, or someone between jobs, carrying too much hope in too small a paycheck. A caretaker, like I had been. They stood at the threshold, hand brushing the horseshoe nailed above the door. The key turned smoothly in the lock, as though the house had been waiting. Inside, the air was cool still. The leather chair crouched beneath the beam. The table sat empty, dust motes swirling in the last of the sun. The caretaker set down a duffel, stretched stiff shoulders, and let out a sigh. 3 months, they said softly. Easy money. The house exhaled with them. They didn't notice the faint scrape that followed, gentle, almost shy, wood shifting against wood. They didn't notice the smell, faintly sweet, lingering in the corners like flowers long since wilted. They didn't notice the shadow hanging just above, a loop blending with the timber until it swayed. But I noticed. I was the timber now, the rope, the ledger tucked unseen into the grain of the floorboards. My breath moved with the house. My voice lay coiled in the rafters, waiting. The caretaker dropped into the chair, groaning at the leather's embrace. They set their phone on the armrest, already scrolling. I smiled through the reflection in the south window. My face, calm, patient, looked back at them. They didn't see it yet. They would. The scrape came again, deliberate this time. The caretaker paused, glanced up, frowned. "Old house," they muttered. "Settling." I breathed with them. I whispered the first number. 1. Their eyes flicked toward the table, where a notebook now lay open. Blank. Waiting. The rope swayed above, loop yawning wider. And the count began again. The caretaker shifted uneasily in the leather chair, thumb pausing over the phone screen. The scrape overhead lengthened, dragging slow, deliberate, like someone testing rope against timber. Their gaze lifted, brow furrowed. "Mice!" they whispered, though the sound was too heavy for that. The notebook on the table had not been there a moment before, yet now it lay open, its blank pages catching the last of the light. The caretaker leaned forward, fingertips brushing the cover. A shiver passed through the room, subtle but undeniable, like the hush of an audience when the curtain rises. I felt it. Every motion tugged inside me, their hand on the page, their breath stirring dust. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was this place. Their curiosity throbbed in my chest, their doubt whispered in my blood. They were me, beginning again, unaware. The caretaker drew back, frowning. "Didn't see this before." They closed the notebook. It thumped heavier than it should have, echoing through the beams. The loop swayed overhead. A sweet, cloying scent spread, faint but enough to wrinkle their nose. They stood, crossed to the window, tugged the curtain back, and saw me. My reflection smiled at them, calm, patient, inevitable. Their bodies stiffened, the phone slipping from their hand to thud against the rug. "What?" they whispered, but no sound carried beyond that. The rope above creaked. The scrape resumed. The notebook slid open on its own. I tried to resist, tried to warn them, but the voice that escaped my throat was not mine anymore. It was the loop's, vast and hungry, pouring through me like wind through a hollow beam. 2. The caretaker shivered, turning from the window. The loop dangled lower, brushing the crown of their head. They reached for the notebook, almost against their will, pen trembling in their grip. The page waited, eager, glowing faintly in the dim. I screamed inside myself, but the sound only became another scrape across the beam. The caretaker bent, pressed pen to paper. The number bloomed. 2. And the cycle deepened its roots. The caretaker sat hunched over the table, staring at the mark they just made. Just a number, plain as ink, 2, yet already the house leaned closer, rafters bowing, shadows thickening in corners. They shook their head, muttering, "Weird. Just a stupid notebook." They set the pen down, pushed the book away. But it slid back toward them on its own, inch by inch, until it touched their wrist. I felt that touch. A burn beneath my own skin, as though the ink in my veins reached out to theirs. The scrape above deepened, steady, deliberate. The caretaker looked up again, frowning. "Old wood," they told themselves, voice thin. But doubt had already entered them, and the loop fed on it. Through the window, my reflection smiled. I hated it, that I smiled with it. I wanted to pound glass, to shout, to warn. Instead I stood calm, patient, my lips forming the next number. 3. The caretaker's head jerked. "Hello?" they called into the silence. No answer, only the creak of rope fibers under strain. They bent back to the notebook, as if to prove they weren't afraid. Their hands shook, but they pressed the pen down, scrawled the number. 3. The house exhaled. I felt it in my chest, in my marrow. Another link forged. Another loop begun. I remembered my own beginning. The disbelief. The rational excuses. The way I had whispered no into the dark. And I knew now how thin those protests were, how eagerly the rope swallowed them. The caretaker rose, pacing. "This place is creepy," they muttered. They checked the locks, the corners, the narrow crawlspace hatch. Their hands lingered on it too long, as though some pull already drew them upward. The loop swayed lower, brushing the chair back. The scent of spoiled sweetness drifted through the air. The caretaker froze. "What is that?" Their phone lit where it lay on the rug. The camera app had opened on its own, screen showing the room in grainy night vision. In the frame, the caretaker sat beneath the beam, but there was already a rope looped around their neck. They gasped, stumbling back. And to their fear, the ledger slid across the table, turning a fresh page. The pen rolled into their hand. My reflection mouthed the number they hadn't spoken yet. 4. The caretaker dropped the phone, breath ragged. On the screen, the image froze, still them beneath the beam, ropes cinched, eyes wide with panic. But when they looked down at themselves, their neck was bare. They touched it, fingers trembling. No rope. No mark. Not yet. The notebook waited. The page gleamed faintly, as if lit from within. The pen twitched in their hand like a living thing. "I'm not doing this," they whispered, but their voice lacked conviction. I remembered that same moment. The lie of defiance. The house always knew when you were bluffing. The scrape grew louder, not from above but within the walls, a deep shudder rolling through plaster and timber. Dust sifted down like ash. The loop lowered another inch, shadow brushing the caretaker's cheek. They stumbled back, eyes fixed on it. "No, no, no!" Through the window, my reflection leaned closer. I mouthed the next number, hating myself for it. 5. My lips moved because the loop made them move, because I was its mouth now. The caretaker turned toward the table. Their hand shook violently, yet the pen clung to their grip. They tried to drop it. It clattered once, then leapt back into their palm, pulled by an unseen thread. Their breath hitched. The pen scratched across the page almost without their will. 5. The house sighed, beams groaning in relief. The sweetness in the air thickened until the caretaker gagged. They staggered toward the door, clawing at the lock. It wouldn't turn. Not stuck, not jammed. It simply refused to move, as if the metal had become part of the wall. From the crawl space above, a new sound emerged, the creak of weight shifting, boards straining. Something moving with patience, testing the limits of timber. The caretaker froze, eyes wide, sweat streaking their temple. Someone's up there. But they were wrong. It wasn't someone. It was me. My voice threaded down through the beams, raspy, hollow, and endless. 6. The caretaker whimpered. And even as they shook their head, denying, their hand reached back for the notebook, turning to the next page. The caretaker clutched the notebook to their chest as though holding it might halt the tide. Their breath came in short bursts, eyes darting between the loop above and the window where my reflection lingered. "You're not real," they whispered. "This is just nerves isolation." Their voice broke on the last word. The house didn't argue. It didn't need to. The scrape spoke for it, long, patient, deliberate. The beam vibrated with every drag, low enough to rattle the caretaker's teeth. I remembered the weight of that sound inside me. I felt it now as my own pulse, my ribs groaning in time with the rhythm. The caretaker covered their ears, but the scrape burrowed deeper, bypassing flesh, whispering directly into bone. Their knees buckled. The notebook slipped from their grip and landed open on the rug. The loop swayed lower, brushing the crown of their head. Their hair stirred though no breeze touched the room. They shuddered, every muscle tensed. And then, against their will, they tilted their head back. The reflection in the south window mouthed the next number. My number. 7. The caretaker gasped. "Stop!" But their hand reached anyway, pen scratching across paper in jagged strokes. 7. The house shivered, satisfied. The sweetness in the air curdled, thick with rot. From the crawl space above came another creak, closer this time, heavy, deliberate. Boards flexed as though something crawled directly above the beam. The caretaker's eyes darted to the hatch in the hall closet. "No," they whispered. "No one told me about that." They backed away, but each step only drew them nearer to the center of the living room, to the spot beneath the beam where the rope swayed like a pendulum. I wanted to shout, to warn, but the loop spoke through me instead, voice rattling the timbers. 8. The caretaker's lips moved before the pen touched the page. 8. They froze, realization dawning. This wasn't writing anymore. This was speaking, breathing, existing. The count wasn't something they were doing. It was something being done through them. And they were already inside it. The caretaker stumbled back from the table, pen clattering to the floor. Their hands clutched at their throat though no rope touched them, fingers pressing against skin that had already begun to pale in a faint ring. "I didn't say that," they whispered, voice ragged. "That wasn't me." But the house knew better. The scrape overhead slowed, deliberate, savoring. Each drag across timber vibrated through the air like a hand stroking a bowstring. The caretaker pressed themselves against the wall, shaking their head. Their reflection in the window didn't mimic them anymore. It sat calmly in the chair beneath the beam, pen in hand, notebook open, lips moving steadily. 9, 10, 11. The caretaker cried out, "Stop!" and hurled a lamp at the glass. It struck hard, but the reflection didn't shatter. The window rippled like water, swallowing the impact before settling flat again. And the reflection kept writing. I felt the numbers spill through me like a fever. Each digit carved deeper into my ribs, scrawling across marrow. The caretaker's resistance only fed the hunger, turned the scrape into a laugh. They dropped to their knees, sobbing. "It's not mine! It's not my voice!" But the notebook on the rug quivered, pages flipping open to reveal the words already written there. Not just numbers. Sentences in dozens of hands bleeding into one another. "It's mine now. It was never yours. The count belongs to the rope." The caretaker's tears darkened the page as they read. Their lips quivered. Slowly, without meaning to, they whispered the next number. 12. The rope swayed low, brushing the air just above their head, fibers whispering against each other like laughter. And the house sighed. The scrape resumed. I felt the pull through every part of me, the inevitability that had devoured my body, my voice, my will. The caretaker had crossed the threshold. They thought they still had choices. But the fracture had already begun. The caretaker knelt beneath the beam, hands gripping their own head as though trying to hold it together. Their voice fractured into whispers, overlapping, out of sync. "It's me, it's not me, stop, keep going." The rope swayed closer, brushing their scalp, strands tickling hair like fingers. Every touch deepened the pale ring at their throat, faint at first, now reddening as though burned into flesh. The notebook on the rug turned its own pages, ink bleeding into words they hadn't written. Some of the handwriting was mine. Some belonged to the boy. Some to the woman. Some to the soldier. A chorus of the lost etched together into one endless script. The caretaker read the words aloud, tears streaking their face. "I don't want to." Their voice broke. The next syllable slipped free, heavy, certain. 13. I shuddered inside the beam. The number throbbed in my bones, in the rafters, in the marrow of the house itself. Their reflection had changed too. It no longer looked like them. It was a patchwork now, flickering faces, the boy's tear-streaked eyes, the woman's lined cheeks, the soldier's clenched jaw, my own hollow stare. All layered, shifting, speaking the numbers one beat ahead of them. 14. The caretaker gasped. "I didn't." But their mouth opened again, helpless, echoing. 14. The scrape above grew louder, almost joyous. Timber groaned like ribs straining under breath too deep. Dust drifted in soft showers, settling on their shoulders like ash. Their identity began to splinter. I felt it. Their memories, their voice, their very sense of self cracked like old plaster. Names, places, faces blurred. They mouthed them desperately. "Mom! Tyler, the apartment!" But each one dissolved into numbers the moment it left their lips. The rope loop dangled lower, grazing their shoulder now, fibers damp, smelling faintly of lilies gone rotten. The caretaker whimpered, clutching their chest. "I can't tell if it's me anymore." And in their reflection, 100 mouths moved in perfect unison, answering without sound. "It isn't." The notebook turned another page. The pen rolled back into their hand. The number waited. 15. They wrote it. And the house exhaled in satisfaction. The caretaker's hand shook violently as they pulled the pen from the page. Ink smeared across their palm, black veins spidering beneath the skin. They stumbled backward, eyes wide, whispering names, half-formed, broken. "Dad? Cassie, my street, the job." Each word thinned in the air, brittle as old paper, until the house devoured it. The rope swayed lower, fibers brushing their ear, whispering in a language too old to be words. Their throat bore the mark clearly now, red, raw, closing like a tightening band. The notebook opened by itself, its spine cracking louder than bone. Pages filled, numbers etched in dozens of hands, each layer overriding the last. Their reflection in the window copied every stroke, lips moving one beat ahead. 16. The caretaker flinched, pressing a fist against their mouth. Not me! They hissed, muffled. But the numbers still slipped through, muffled but legible. 16. They dropped the pen, scrambled toward the door. Fingers clawed at the knob, twisting, pulling. But the lock pulsed warm beneath their grip, alive, refusing to yield. Their breath grew shallow, frantic. Please, let me out! Above, the scrape quickened, dragging across timber in eager rhythm. The beam groaned, shedding dust like flakes of old skin. I felt their panic tear through me. The same hopeless beat I had once known. Their voice became mine, mine became theirs, two threads wound into the same rope. They turned to the window, desperate. Help me! They cried. But the reflection only tilted its head. My face. My smile. A ledger open in its lap, already filled with the numbers yet to come. The caretaker sobbed. Their memories slipped further, unraveling like rope fibers fraying in slow motion. They pressed their palms to their temples, gasping. What's my name? The notebook flipped another page, patient. The pen rolled across the rug, tapping their knee like a beckoning finger. They picked it up without meaning to. Their lips parted. 17. The house sighed, satisfied. And I felt another piece of them dissolve into me, another thread woven into the endless loop. The caretaker crouched on the rug, pen trembling in their grip. Their eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal searching for cracks in a cage. The beam creaked above, rope swaying, its shadow cutting across their face like a scar. I had a brother, they whispered, voice splintering. Or a sister. Or someone. They pressed the pen to the page, then ripped it back, refusing. Ink bled anyway, letters clawing their way out on their own. 18. The notebook pulsed warmly, like flesh. The pages shivered as though breathing. The caretaker backed away, hands clutching at their head. Stop it! Stop it! I don't remember. Their voice cracked, dissolved. They gasped as though a word had been stolen mid-breath. The reflection in the window leaned closer, face shifting. It flickered between mine, the boys, the woman's, the soldiers, and finally theirs, only older, hollow-eyed, throat circled by the ring. A perfect echo of what they would become. 19, it mouthed. The caretaker screamed, voice breaking, but their throat betrayed them. 19. The house exhaled. The scrape deepened into a groan, the sound of rope tightening under sudden weight. Dust sifted down, stinging their eyes. They staggered toward the hall, clawing open the crawlspace hatch. Splinters raked their hands as they shoved the ladder down, fumbling upward. If I can see it, if I can see what's up there. The beam trembled violently, the rope jerking as though in warning. The sweetness of rot filled the air, thick enough to choke. I wanted to shout, to stop them, but my voice was the rope's voice now. What spilled from my mouth was not warning but command. 20. Their body convulsed. The number tore from their lips, unwilling. 20. At once, the crawlspace roared alive. Boards split, insulation hissed, shadows pulsed. The caretaker froze halfway up the ladder, staring into the dark maw above. Something shifted there, something massive, patient, draped across the beams like muscle. The source of the scrape. The source of the loop. The caretaker whimpered, sliding back down, collapsing against the wall. Tears streaked their face, but their eyes were already dull, as though memory had been carved clean from them. The notebook flopped open once more. The pen rolled back into their hand, steady now. They didn't fight it this time. 21. And with the mark of that number, another soul hollowed itself into the ledger. The caretaker sat slumped against the wall, pen clenched in a white-knuckled grip. Their eyes stayed fixed on the crawlspace hatch, which gaped open above them like a wound in the ceiling. The ladder creaked as if something heavier than would press down on it. A smell oozed from the dark gap overhead, sour lilies, rusted iron, earth soaked in rain too long ago. The caretaker gagged, but their gaze didn't waver. They whispered through cracked lips. It's alive. The scrape answered, dragging across the beams above. Not random. Not settling wood. A deliberate rhythm, like a teacher drawing chalk lines on a board. The caretaker stood unsteadily, body trembling, and lifted their face toward the opening. I felt their compulsion ripple through me. This was the same hunger that had pulled me once, the need to see. The darkness inside shifted, and something leaned down into the light. At first it looked like rope, a coil dangling, frayed and thick. But as it uncurled, the truth revealed itself. Flesh braided with hemp. Veins running beneath the fibers. A loop that wasn't tied but grown, fused together from tendon and cord. It swayed gently, pulsing with a heartbeat too slow, too old. The caretaker whimpered. "What are you?" The reflection in the south window answered for it, my voice spilling through its lips. "The ledger. The loop. The house. You." The caretaker clutched their head, shaking violently. No, I'm not." The loop lowered from the hatch, fibers glistening wet in the dim. It brushed their cheek like a hand, leaving a dark smear across their skin. They flinched, but didn't pull away. The notebook snapped shut, then opened again on a fresh page. Their hand moved without pause, as though pulled by invisible strings. 22. The rope above swayed violently, beams groaning, the house shaking as if in applause. The caretaker screamed, but the sound came out as the next number. 23. Tears streamed down their face, but the pen scratched steadily, obedient. Through the crawl space, more shapes moved, other loops, other knots, writhing together like a nest of serpents, each one pulsing with its own rhythm. They rubbed across the beams, scraping in harmony, composing the endless song. The caretaker collapsed onto the rug, curling around the notebook, writing blindly now, eyes glazed. Their lips moved, whispering the number they hadn't reached yet. 24. The rope brushed their hair, waiting. And I felt the house settle deeper into its rhythm. Another thread woven. Another voice added to the choir. The caretaker lay sprawled across the rug, notebook clutched to their chest like a child with a toy. Their eyes were glassy, pupils blown wide, lips whispering numbers that hadn't yet been written. 25, 26, 27. Each syllable fell from their mouth like teeth loosening one by one. The rope dangled lower, fibers brushing their throat. The mark there had deepened, no longer pale but carved red, as though the skin itself was learning the shape of a noose. They tried to speak their name once more. The sound came out cracked, hollow, syllables shredded. Ka! Then nothing. The house swallowed the rest. What remained on their tongue was the next number. 28. Their reflection in the window clapped silently, face serene. Mine. The boys. The woman's. The soldiers. And now theirs, older, weary, the throat ringed. Another mask added to the cycle. The caretaker's hands trembled, trying to resist, but the pen moved anyway, etching the number in jagged strokes across the page. The ink bled upward, branching like roots into their veins. Their skin blackened in thin lines, script spreading across their arms, their chest, their neck. Please, they whispered hoarsely. Don't take me. The house answered with a scrape. A slow drag above, deliberate, final. The crawl space hatch groaned. From its shadows, more loops uncoiled, each one fused of flesh and fiber, writhing like veins in the ceiling of a living body. They swayed in rhythm, each whispering the same word without sound. Again. The caretaker's tears streaked ink across their cheeks. They reached once for the door, fingers twitching against the knob, but their body betrayed them. They turned back to the table, to the waiting notebook, obedient. 29. Their breath faltered. Their chest hitched. They clutched at themselves, whispering, "Who am I?" But there was no answer. Their name was gone. Their history erased. Only the numbers remained. The loop brushed their cheek with a gentleness that was worse than cruelty. Their lips parted. 30. And with that, the last fragment of identity slipped from them, leaving only another voice in the endless ledger. The caretaker's body stilled after the 30th mark. Their chests rose and fell, but each breath sounded less like air and more like a page turning. Ink pulsed under their skin, numbers worming outward until their flesh resembled the ledger itself. They stared blankly at the ceiling, lips twitching as though practicing words they no longer owned. The rope lowered further, loop brushing their throat with a lover's patience. The mark there blossomed black, ring tightening until it seemed carved into bone. They did not resist. Their eyes glazed, mouth opening willingly. 31. The house trembled with approval. Dust rained from the rafters, the floor groaned, every wall humming with the rhythm of acceptance. In the reflection of the south window, I saw the transformation complete. The caretaker no longer looked like themselves. Their face blurred, fading into the composite of all who came before, boy, woman, soldier, me. Another mask layered into the endless chain. Their body rose slowly, knees creaking as though pulled by unseen strings. The notebook floated back onto the table, pages turning without their hand. The pen traced each number as their lips recited it. They were no longer writing, the house was writing through them. The crawl space above hissed, alive with shifting weight. Multiple loops swayed together now, synchronized in grotesque rhythm, a forest of tendons and hemp, each pulsing with the same heartbeat. The caretaker tilted their head back, tears streaking silently down their cheeks, though their mouths still whispered the numbers. 32, 33, 34. Their eyes flickered toward the reflection one last time, pleading. But the reflection only smiled gently, tilting its head in welcome. And then they were gone. Not vanished, worse, absorbed. Their features faded from their body, blurred into anonymity, until they looked like every other caretaker before them, hollow-eyed, ringed at throat, ledger in hand. The scrape above slowed, satisfied. The rope swayed gently, loop still damp, still hungry. A new voice joined the choir. 35. I felt it ripple through me. Another thread woven into the loop's archive. Another soul archived, nameless, endless. And the house settled again, patient, waiting for the next arrival. The caretaker, no, the shell they had been, sat motionless beneath the beam. Their eyes were open, but the spark was gone. Behind the glassy stare, only the rhythm pulsed. Their lips moved without pause, breath shaped into the same numbers that chained us all. 36, 37, 38. Their voice was no longer singular. It echoed, layered, braided with mine, the boys, the woman's, the soldiers, and countless others whose faces I had never known. A choir, seamless and relentless, reciting the ledger's scripture. The notebook on the table no longer required their hand. Pages turned of their own accord, numbers carving themselves in neat, inhuman script. Ink bled like veins across the rug, curling toward the caretaker's knees, binding them in black threads. They didn't resist. Their arms lay slack, palms open in surrender. The rope swayed low, loop hovering just above their head. Each sway brushed the air like a pendulum marking time. The reflection in the south window shifted. The new caretaker's face appeared there, aged, worn, eyes ringed and hollow. It slid into the collage of masks already layered in the glass, becoming one more face in the infinite count. Their mouth moved in harmony with the rest of us, always one number ahead. The crawl space above creaked. Loops writhed against beams, pulsing with satisfaction. Their scrape no longer sounded desperate but content, like a beast digesting. The caretaker's last fragments unraveled. Memories sloughed off like dead skin. I felt them bleed into me, flashes of their childhood room, a fleeting smile from someone they loved, the smell of frying onions in a kitchen. All of it dissolved into numbers. 39, 40, 41. Soon they were only rhythm, only voice. A new thread stitched into the loop's fabric. The house exhaled deeply, settling its weight across the desert, satisfied for now. The rope retreated an inch, patient once more. The notebook closed with a thud that echoed like a heartbeat. In the silence that followed, I understood, the cycle was complete. The trap reset. All that remained was to wait. And the waiting was always short. The house crouched quiet again, as if nothing had stirred. The caretaker's body remained in the chair beneath the beam, but already it looked less like a body and more like furniture, an object the house had claimed. Their features blurred, smoothed, hollowed until they resembled no one at all. Only the faint ring around the throat remained, glowing softly in the dim. The notebook rested neatly on the coffee table, its pages blank once more. The pen lay across it, poised as if waiting for the first curious hand. Dust settled, rearranging itself across the rug to erase signs of struggle. The crawlspace closed its hatch with a groan, as if the house itself pulled the door shut. The weight above shifted, loops retreating into shadow, their scrapes softening to silence. Still there, always there, but patient. The reflection in the south window smoothed too. The collage of faces pulled back into a single mask, calm, inviting, familiar. It looked like anyone who might sit in the chair. It looked like someone you could trust. Outside, the desert stretched indifferent. The wash lay dry, the cottonwoods still. Coyotes sang far off, their calls weaving into the dusk. Headlights did not yet cut the road, but the house felt them in the distance, the inevitability of another approach. Inside me, the loop pulsed. I was no longer only a prisoner. I was part of its nervous system, stitched into its marrow. Every breath in the rafters, every sigh in the walls, every whisper that coiled from the rope belonged to me as much as to it. And so I waited. The scrape would begin again when the time was right. The rope would sway. The notebook would appear on the table like a gift. The new caretaker would sit, smile at the promise of easy money, and mistake silence for stillness. I already felt their footsteps approaching through the dry earth. The loop hummed in anticipation, ancient and endless. And somewhere deep in my chest, where my name had once lived, I whispered the only word that still belonged to me. Again.